Good afternoon, everybody. This is John Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage. I'm here from my room in Bolton Hill, and I'm happy that Nathan Denny's, my colleague at the Baltimore Architecture Foundation, is in the captain's chair of this Zoom ship. So I want to say thank you, everybody, for taking a little bit of time out on Friday, this Friday, to join us. And thanks so much for all of you who made a voluntary contribution of whatever size. We are both small organizations, and this is an enormous help. So thank you, thank you. Before introducing our speaker today, just want to give a quick shout out to our the next 2 Fridays coming up. We've got 2 more programs. The next Friday, July 17th, we've got Documenting Green Book Sites by Ann Bruder. If you haven't heard of the Green Book, that was the motoring guide for African Americans, showing where safe spots to eat and to sleep were back in the day. So that should be really fascinating. And then 2 weeks from now, on July 24th, we've got a talk on roadblocks and the effects of highways on Druid Hill Park. And I'm thrilled that we have 2 speakers for that. Graham Carreel Allen, who's a public artist and a Baltimore Heritage Board member, who's been doing a lot of work trying to redesign Druid Hill Park to make it more friendly and accessible. And Jennifer Kuntz, who's with Clean Water Action, talking about some of the environmental impacts that the roads have had. We all know Druid Hill Park, but I can guarantee you if you tune in for half an hour in 2 weeks, we will all get to know Druid Hill Park in a much deeper way. All right, so with that, I'm gonna say thank you to Eric Holcomb for joining us. Eric's our speaker today. Eric is the Executive Director of the city's preservation agency, CHAP, the Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation. He's been there several years. He's, as the head, he's been at CHAP several more years. Eric, I won't reveal exactly how many, but I think it's near to 25. If there's anybody in Baltimore who has both a perspective on where we've been trying to preserve our historic places and where we're going, it's Eric Holcomb. So with that, we've had a little bit of visual difficulties. So we've got Eric on audio, but I think you're just going to see his name in the little. You won't see his nice face. You'll just see his name in the little square stamp-sized box that we're all looking at. So Eric, thanks so much, and we're all yours.
Yeah, well, thank you, everybody. First of all, I just want to just do another audio check. Does everybody hear me clearly? Yep. I will take that as that everything is going fine. Well, yep. Thank you. I'm going to do something really quick here, because what I really like to do is I like to get into a discussion and really talk with people and find out what you all are thinking at the same time, and sort of lead a conversation that could hopefully provide us with more insights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk really quickly, talk about where we were in historic preservation in Baltimore, where we are today, where I think we are today, and then also where we're going. So with that in mind, Nathan, I would like to see if you could get us to that first slide that has the Mount Clair Mansion and the Fort McHenry pictures on it, and just talk really quickly that, you know, historic preservation, what I call the Charles Hosmer preservation, that is the preservation of folks running around in the late 19th and early 20th century, saving places that are really important to history. And in Baltimore, of course, we have the Mount Clair Mansion. And in 1890, that was one of the first restorations in the city. That was done by, I think it was Wyatt and Nolting were the architects on that. So that was really one of the first preservation efforts in the city of Baltimore, 1890 for that restoration. And then in 1906, we have Fort McHenry. It was saved in 1906 from becoming a cattle quarantine. And it was saved for what they call, quote unquote, sentimental purposes. So it was really important that was saved. And then the National Park Service made it a historic shrine, I think, in the early 30s. And then in 1931, I just wanted to point out that we had the Peel Museum. That's the oldest museum building in the Western Hemisphere. That was constructed in 1813. But in 1931, we turned that into the Municipal Museum. And of course, today we have lots of wonderful people out there trying to turn that into another tourist attraction and another center for history, Baltimore history. So that's really important, but that's what we were doing in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Also, I'd just like to say preservation with the small p, meaning that saving places maybe not under the rubric of historic preservation. Remember in 1943, we had our first efforts to we had our first plan to shove a limited access highway through the city of Baltimore. That's 1943. 1945, we get Robert Moses comes down to Robert Moses comes down to Baltimore and does a plan. He plans to have a highway that is where Center Street is right now. It would have actually took out part of where the Walters Art Museum is, and you could see lots of these renderings throughout the area. And then, of course, in 1959, we have the rendering that, Nathan, if you want to move to that rendering of the 1959 picture of the 95 and 70 meeting at the Inner Harbor. The fight, that was really, really great, a fight. So we had really more than a dozen routes that were created. But what the reasons we won the fight to actually get the highway moved south. We still built a highway in some form or fashion, but we moved it where 895 and 95 is today. But that took 27 different organizations fighting together. It was the first time, I think, that you really had a lot of African-American communities fighting with some white communities. So it was really the idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So that's something that was happening, and from 43 to 60, it was really in the 60s that was created. The Society for the Preservation of Federal Hill and Fells Point was created. And in the 60s, we have two other organizations that show up, which really sort of solidified preservation in Baltimore. The first one, of course, is Baltimore Heritage that comes in 1960, 1961. And then CHAP, which was created by ordinance, introduced by Judge Ward, Councilman Ward at the time, and Mayor Schaefer or Councilman Schaefer also co-signed that bill. And that was really, the CHAP was created at that time to administer the review for Mount Vernon Local Historic District. So really quickly, so that was in 64. So now I want to talk about what CHAP has done, because I just want to brag for a couple minutes. I'd like to say 1981, CHAP begins the Monument Conservation Program. It's really the first conservation program in the country for bronzes. 1994, CHAP reviews more than 100 landmarks and 18 local historic districts. I use 94 because that is actually the year that both Eddie Leon and I started with CHAP, and I remember that there were 18 local historic districts at that time. We also created the Interpretive Markers Program back in the 80s. In 1996, really important, we created one of the most powerful tools in neighborhood revitalization, the CHAP tax credit, and I think we're going to be doing that again. We'll talk a little bit about where we're going. 1997, it was CHAP that really spearheaded the effort to create the Baltimore Heritage Area. Of course, right now that's in really good hands with the folks running that, and we're really proud and happy that we have such strong partners in the Baltimore Heritage area. The other thing is, in 2004, CHAP merges with the Planning Department. What did that do? And I would like to say that it was really maybe one of the most important pieces of it that people really don't know about. That is really the first time that the planning activities, the creation of master plans, neighborhood plans, the removal of or creation of urban renewal districts, the work with making sure that preservation is looked at through the analysis of even zoning. CHAP staff was involved with all of that. So that was really important. Now, because we are now part of the Planning Department, CHAP, historic preservation is always looked at through the lens of planning. So where we are now, and we had to double check this because believe it or not, it's really hard to figure out how many historic districts we have in the city of Baltimore. But I'd like to say is we figured it out. We have 37 local historic districts in Baltimore. It's a little bit, it's depending on how you count. There is like Butcher's Hill is that 1 or 2 local historic districts. We're calling it 1 local historic district with 2 non-contiguous parts. We have 202 landmarks, in which we have 4 interior landmarks now. So we would like to get more interior landmarks part of that. The tax credit, which I talked about being created in 1996, that now has helped leverage over $1.3 billion of restoration funds in the city of Baltimore. And we would like to say, I think it's more about 4,300 projects and proposals that have gone through or are going through the CHAP tax credit. It has been an essential component to a lot of the neighborhood revitalization efforts, even in places like Collington Square and McKelderry Park, and Upton's Marble Hill and Union Square. So with that, we also, again, have written probably over a dozen preservation a dozen histories for neighborhood plans. We have created recommendations for everything from master plans to neighborhood plans to strategic plans. And that also includes the housing and community development plans too. That's sort of really important because I think that we have a very good working relationship with HCD. And of course, they are also the ones that are in charge of demolition. And we could talk maybe a little bit more, have a discussion about how we sort of work in coordination with demolition. Demolition is going to be with us in the city of Baltimore for some time, and it's just basically looking at the numbers with at least 16,000 vacant and abandoned properties in the city of Baltimore, and a city that it wasn't built for 1 million people, but right after World War II, it had about 1 million people in it, but it was definitely not built for 600,000. It was built probably for between 700,000 to 800,000 people. So that's something that we're really looking for. Also now really to talk about where we are going. One of the things I'd just like to say is, you know, especially with what's been happening now with the George Floyd and right after Freddie Gray, we have done a lot of work to try to be more equitable in the Department of Planning, but also in historic preservation. And we are learning, I think, well, I would say that the other staff probably has already learned today that I am learning as the director of how to listen. Learning what historic significant means to community members, to organizers, to folks in the city of Baltimore. I want to create important historical narratives for neighborhoods. A neighborhood that has a history, that has a story to it, I believe is more valuable than a neighborhood that does not have a history or a story to it. We want to make sure that story is important for the people that live there, the people that want to move there, and the people that love to visit there. So that's something that we're really looking to do. We also want to get in front of any type of displacement. I don't use the word gentrification. I like to use the word displacement. But when we do neighborhood revitalization, we want to make sure that, you know, historic preservation doesn't make people leave and move out, that we actually make room for people and enhance that community for them to live. I always like to say, I don't want to preserve history. I want to use history to preserve and revitalize communities. And that's really where I'm committed. And I think that's where my heart and passion is more than any other place, is how do we help communities become places that are, in the words of Brown Morton, are conducive to healthy human development. And I think that preservation has a role to that, for that, as well as making safe streets and getting rid of the vacant and abandoned buildings and good schools and all of that. So, but preservation, especially in Baltimore, I think is part of that. And the creation of those histories and stories are really part of that too. So one of the things I want to try to get into sort of more of the practical and what we're doing on the ground, and then maybe go back and talk about ideas. I love ideas, but we're going to really talk about what we're doing now, and we hope to get your help, the folks in there. In many ways, we do not really, we don't hold the tools to preserve. What we really do is we advocate for the mayor and city council to preserve. We do that by creating local landmark recommendations for local landmarks, recommendations for local historic districts, but that's always a mayor and city council ordinance that is created to do things like that. So with that in mind, we have an incredibly important tax credit tool out there that will sunset and go away on February of 2021. July 6th, we just introduced a city council bill to renew that tax credit legislation as is for 12 months. So we are buying ourselves another 12 months. So that will, if this ordinance goes through and is passed, we will have 12 months to get hopefully another bill renewed, introduced and renewed, and by 2022. We did that because there's so many unknowns right now because of the pandemic. We just felt that we wanted to try to just keep, we know what the current tax credit program does. We know how much it takes from the city coffers. We know how much it produces into the local economy. And with that, we know we wanted to keep that consistent. But we're going to need your help. We're going to need your support as this goes through city council and gets signed by the mayor for the 12-month extension. And then we're going to need your help to figure out how we can make the current tax credit legislation stronger. How can we help more neighborhoods? How can we help? How can it be a better tool in our more distressed neighborhoods? We're also looking to do a conservation district legislation. A lot of folks, we've talked to dozens of cities across the country, and we think that in Baltimore, which has a lot of neighborhoods that are absolutely wonderful, but we don't want to sort of impose the local historic district design review on them. For every exterior change, you must get a review and approval by CHAP. We want to make sure that, but we want to keep those districts standing, and we want to push them in the right direction, and we want to have another tool in our toolbox to help out for the community development. So the conservation district legislation, the way we're looking at it now, is we would create a conservation district just like we would create a local historic district, but the design review would be different. Right now, we're thinking the design review would only be for demolition, new construction, and that also includes new construction of large additions too. And also we would want to see if we could use the conservation district for demolition by neglect. And then maybe with those tools, we could work with our HCD partners to really turn around some of our more distressed neighborhoods. Woodbury Local Historic District, we're really excited. That should be, that's in the mayor's office right now. Hopefully he'll sign it any day. I'm confident he will. Mayor Young has been a great supporter of historic preservation. Also, we have been working very diligently on climate change, which is a very depressing topic. But sea levels are rising, and they will be rising, and we want to figure out how to make our neighborhoods more resilient, especially neighborhoods like Fells Point. How do we make them more resilient to the flooding that will come? And I think we have a really good plan in place. We are going to be looking at changing our guidelines. So with that in mind, I've been talking almost for 20 minutes. I am going to spend another 60 seconds and then hopefully create a conversation. Again, you know, I see historic preservation as a revitalization tool. I believe that there has really been no community revitalization effort that has been successful without historic preservation. But with that in mind, really, community revitalization only using historic preservation is rarely successful too. It takes all hands on deck type of effort to move communities in the right direction. We need everybody. We need preservationists, architects, community leaders, community organizers, planners, HCD officials, politicians. We need developers. We need banks. We need people who want to move back to the city. We need Live Baltimore to help us all do that. So it's an all hands on deck effort. We need to create the better collaborations with our partners in community development. We can stop demolition. CHAP is really good at stopping demolition. We can go out, and we've done it once or twice with our potential landmark list tool, and other buildings that wanted to be demolished in local historic districts we have prevented. We can prevent demolition pretty easily, but that does not always lead to preservation. That's why we need our partners. That's why we need everybody at the table working towards a better Baltimore. And by doing that, and as I said, I am learning how to listen better, learning what it means to take the histories of the community and making sure it really highlights and celebrates the history for the residents that are there now. So we are really trying to reach a broader audience and really to expand the history of Baltimore. But I could tell you, I think right now, history is going to be extremely important. The developmental history of Baltimore, the architectural history of Baltimore. There's no way anybody could build another Baltimore in Maryland. What we have standing in Baltimore is potential value. And when we restore that with quality restoration, we bring in so much more value to this city. We want to do that smart. We want to do that so it helps everybody. So that's really where we are. I'm going to stop talking. Johns and Nathan, do you want to maybe start to help create a conversation?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. And I forgot to mention in the beginning, if you have questions for Eric, type them in the chat box, and I'm going to go ahead and read them out. We've got one in there already, so let's just jump in and start with that one. So Eric, the question is there anything that can be done to better align the city and state, the Maryland Historical Trust, preservation and tax credit processes?
I do, but well, the answer is we have been talking about that. Is there something we can do? I think absolutely there's a lot that we can do. I think we've created a tax credit advisory group with Johns has been actually a part of that. That advisory group has been really helpful in guiding sort of the changes we want to do with our tax credit. That also helped create, and hopefully we're going to be sharing with everybody a wonderful tax credit report that was done by Place Economics, which is going to just probably really just wonderful statistics. I think it's really hit and has given us great insight on how this local tax credit has helped. With that in mind, the tax credit advisory group has talked about how can we better align the state tax credit and the local tax credit. There is energy to do that. We need help to make sure that we move that forward. I think probably one of the places to start would be to let's get a meeting. I think with the meetings these days are the Zoom type meetings, so we could get a virtual meeting to talk about that. I would say CHAP would be available late July, August for a meeting of that nature. That's something that we can work on. Johns, I don't know if maybe you and I could think about maybe trying to get that started.
Well, we have one volunteer to help already, so we're one better off
Right.
than we were 30 minutes ago. So I'll just say to Claudia DeCarlo, stay tuned. Somebody will give you a call. We got another question about, are you already planning to work with the incoming city administration?
The answer is yes. Whenever we have a new administration, and we've had a lot of practice since we've had, I think, 3 mayors in the last 3 or 4 years, we always try to make sure that we have good synopsis of our programs, of our regulatory roles and responsibilities, and we pretty much not only with the new mayor's administration, but we will be talking with all new city council folks too, and providing them with packages of what we do. That way, if anybody's always free to shoot me emails with thoughts and ideas, and I can make sure that they get sort of placed in sort of the bucket of ideas that we could share with the mayor's office, with the new city council folks.
Excellent. All right, we're going to keep rolling on. Raymond Barr, Dr. Barr, All Things Canton History, has requested copies of your slides and also offered to support CHAP and its efforts. So Nathan, I'm going to speak for both Baltimore Architecture Foundation and Baltimore Heritage. We'll get the slides on our website, I think, shortly. So yeah, Dr. Barr, yes, we'll make them available. Another question is, how do you balance the need to preserve the past with the equally important and pressing need to create modern, affordable homes for people, knowing that it is often cheaper to build new than to renovate existing buildings?
Yeah. Well, we have distressed neighborhoods out there right now that has lots of space to build new. But we also have an historic preservation tax credit that has been used as a part of a package to create affordable housing. And we've done that at working with TRF in Collington Square area. Come Home Baltimore and the Collington Square area is probably one of the best examples. So with that in mind, yeah, rehab is more expensive. We are working to try to, address cost. Are there better ways to do a design review? Can you create a quality restoration that's a little bit cheaper? We need to make sure it's in the competitive piece. But remember, if you're looking at the long term and you're looking at quality lasts longer. Quality gives more value, more monetary value, as well as home value a lot longer than cheap new construction. So the idea is, how do we find that? And I think it's creating those tools. A lot of great developers are out there that can combine the CHAP tax credits, the state historic preservation tax credits, and the low-income housing tax credits all together, and they can make these great packages. Yeah, and we want to do more, and we want to find more tools out there to do that. So we are working with our development partners, our community development partners out there to do that. If you have any ideas, that would be great. Please share them. But yeah, we want to do that. And I think the balance is, there's lots of places to do new construction. We want new construction in Baltimore City. We want them in local historic districts. We want new construction to enhance the communities. And that's what the design review is all about. Thank you.
we've got a few more here. And our pledge is not to go too much over our half-hour mark. So we'll, and you're of course welcome to click leave at any time, but we'll try to take maybe 2 or 3 more. The next one is back on the tax credits. Do you have data on the percentage of credits that have been leveraged by individual homeowners versus investment companies?
The answer is yes. And I am not going to be able to tell you what it is. I think it overwhelmingly, the CHAP tax credit has been used by what I call row house rehabbers or row house developers, small time developers. They've been used by large time developers, but about only 6% of the folks that have used the local tax credit have been homeowners. One of the things that we have done, and we talked about at the Tax Credit Advisory Group, is can we create another tool that would be geared towards homeowners that wouldn't be probably a property tax credit, but would be an income tax credit to help homeowners with fixing their roofs, putting on the new siding on their buildings, repointing, getting the new windows on the row houses. So we are looking into that, and we want to move forward with that. I don't know where we are right now. The pandemic has sort of stalled that idea, but I want to say, and I'm going to probably regret this, but hold my feet to the fire, people, on that. Make sure that, that CHAP, the staff, is looking at and really trying to create sort of that position paper for a historic preservation income tax credit for homeowners. And I think that would be really important for sort of that long-term maintenance and well-being of our communities.
We'll take you up on your offer to hold your feet to the fire, Eric. Thank you. All right,
Thank you.
Next question is mentioning climate change as its effect on neighborhoods. How do you look at neighborhoods as far as its contribution to climate change?
One of the things that we have discovered, and it's almost a cliche now, is the quote, "The greenest building is the one that's already built." So if we are looking for a resilience package, we can say that if we want to conserve our resources, the best thing to do is to rehabilitate an existing building, to rehabilitate an historic building. With that in mind now, we want to really work with the smart people, the scientists out there, and really figure out how to make those historic buildings as efficient as possible. Make sure that the windows work as good as they do. Make sure that the that we insulate where we can insulate. And what we're finding out, there's the Green Building Lab or the National Trust of Historic Preservation does say that if you take an historic building and you weatherize it properly, then that may not be as energy efficient as a new construction that's built to be energy efficient, but it's comparable. And if you bring in the idea that that building's already built and you're not burning 8 gallons of gasoline to create 1 brick or something of that nature, then the weatherized historic building is going to be probably more resilient and have more conservation power than anything else. So that's what some of the things we're looking at. But that's also part of the historic preservation with the Green Building Lab at the National Trust is really working on, and we keep our eye on that. And we also have some great folks in Baltimore that have done some wonderful things. And we also want to make sure that when we insulate and weatherize a historic building, we don't hurt the historic building too. That's really important also.
All right, final question here. Are there programs incentivizing repurposed or reclaimed materials? You mentioned demolition by neglect. Are there large-scale efforts to reclaim items to support restoration or add character to new buildings, repurposed or reclaimed?
CHAP has been on the sidelines with that, but there are the details. There is Second Chance. CHAP was involved with Second Chance when they were getting started. But there is that. The other thing is Commissioner Braverman has been really into this idea. And and a lot of the demolition that we are reviewing, approving, we're trying to get more and more of those demolitions to be deconstructions. And that does many different things. And we really need to be better collaborators on this. But what that does is it teaches people how to work, how to deconstruct a house. If you learn how to deconstruct a house, you're a little bit closer to learning how to restore a house. So it's an important component to the restoration industry of creating labor and living wage jobs for people. So that's important. The second thing is you save that stuff. Now we need to go a step further. We need to really work on that. Maybe that's something we can talk with the preservation community in Baltimore, can talk with the new administration and say, hey, we want a group out there that just solely thinks about this to create ideas. So that's sort of my giving. I feel like every time I answer, I give it back to you all too. Is like, yeah, we have a lot of work to do, but there has been a lot of work done already, but I think that we can improve it greatly.
Great. Well, thank you, Eric. And again, thank you everybody for carving out a little chunk of your Friday. Hope you have a good weekend. We're gonna hit the end button and hope we'll see you next Friday. Thanks again.
Well, thank you, everybody.